Hello, my name is Brian Lewis, and I am an instructor with JTNS in the Public Works section. And today we're going to talk about recognizing trenching hazards and go over a review of some of the things we need to look for, both as we're approaching the trench, as we're working in the trench, and other information on construction and construction type sites where we need to be vigilant and make sure people do not get hurt or worse, maybe even killed. We want to avoid both things like trench collapses where people are unprotected, as well as any other hazards that might be on that site. So, as I said, this is JTNS. Please, if you have any questions, make sure to contact us or your instructor. So a few of the things we're going to talk about is how to approach a trench, what to look for as we approach the trench. We also want to talk about weather conditions because the cohesiveness, unconfined compression strength of the soil is going to depend a lot on water content. And of course, weather is going to impact that, especially for a trench that's been left open for more than a few hours. The longer it's left open, the more weather conditions are going to impact it. We're also going to talk about looking for horizontal depressions and cracks as we approach the trench that's in the ground. And as we approach the trench and have looked for horizontal depressions and cracks, we're going to look for vertical cracks and potential or partial cave-ins along the wall. And we're also going to look at or talk about things we need to look at in the big picture of the site. So, how do we approach a trench? That is one of the first, if not the first thing we're going to talk about as we approach a trench and or an excavation. A trench is pretty much sides 4 times longer on the long side than the short side, but we also have excavations that do not quite meet that definition. And anyway, as you approach the trench, it's important that we know how to approach it, where to approach it, and what to look for as we approach it. So we walk up to the trench. I'm going to encourage you to walk up to the short side or at a 45-degree angle at the corner of the short side. I'm also going to encourage you to look at the trench and for horizontal depressions and cracks, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. We also want to make sure we don't become so enamored with looking at the trench we forget the big picture of heavy equipment, of overhead power lines, of other potential fall hazards, impalement hazards, things that we need to pay attention to, and things that we need to take into consideration, engineering, administrative, and PPE considerations to make sure everyone's protected. It's a difficult job to be a competent person. We have to look at the trench and everything else, right? So as we approach the trench or excavation, we want to estimate how deep it is, if not know exactly how deep it is. We want to think about how long the long sides are. Obviously, the longer that side is, especially if it's a vertical side, the more likely that the soil is going to let go. We also want to know if we need a ladder. Is there a ladder present? Any excavation or trench that's 4 feet or more deep, there needs to be a ladder, and it needs to be within 25 feet of everyone that's in the trench so that they can get out in an emergency or if there was a partial collapse. If there's a trench box, obviously the ladder needs to be inside the trench box. The ladder needs to extend at least 3 feet above the landing where you're going to get out. We also need to take note, is there heavy equipment? Do we need to pay attention to how close it is and can it be driven into the trench? We also need to think about vibrations from the equipment because obviously it vibrates. It's going to cause the soil to vibrate as the weight presses down and out because there is a man-made cut in the earth. there's air there. There's not really anything for the dirt to press against, and the vibrations from the equipment is going to cause problems, more likely to have a trench collapse. Also, we want to look at adjacent buildings because they place weight on the footers, which can place weight on the trench walls. We want to be careful with that. We want to pay attention that the spoil pile is at least 2 feet away from the sides. One, because it places weight on the side of the trench. Two, because no one wants to get hit in the head and shoulders with a rock or dirt. I don't care if you have a hard hat on and safety equipment, it's important that we not get hurt. Also, is the soil too wet or too dry is important. Along with the soil being too wet or too dry, it's important that we consider what the weather has been like, both before we make the cut in the earth, while the cut is open, and if it's open for an extended period of time. Unfortunately, for soil to maintain its cohesiveness or how it sticks together, we have to consider how much water is present in the soil. Too much, too little can cause problems. Too much rain, and the rain tends to cut grooves into the soil and make it more likely to collapse. If it's too dry, it crumbles. So we want just the right amount of water. We also want to consider, especially in obviously the winter time, if the ground has been frozen, water expands when it freezes. So if the ground has been frozen and then has thawed, we will have an expansion and then a contraction of water. That's going to cause some issues and potentially make the soil loose so that it is more likely to collapse. The same thing is true with both the wind and the sun when a trench has been left open for an extended period of time. Wind is going to come along and remove moisture from the dirt and cause problems, just like the sun beating down on an open trench will dry out. So, as we approach the trench, and we've taken into consideration the weather and the water content and all those things, and we approach from the short side, or as we approach from a 45-degree angle on that corner, we want to look for horizontal depressions and cracks that we can observe in the ground. They don't have to be huge depressions or cracks, but we still want to look for those. The reason we want to look for those is because, especially along the long side, is roughly 1.5, 1 3/4 the depth of the trench. It is likely, if there's going to be a horizontal depression or crack, that's where we're going to see it. So if the trench is, say for example, 10 feet deep, somewhere around 18 to 15 feet from the edge of the trench, you might see a depression or a crack. And if that's there, it is an indication that collapse is imminent. So what typically happens, there's a pivot point towards the foot or the bottom of the trench or somewhere up along the wall. And if there's a crack that forms, what happens is this dirt rotates out of phase and falls into the trench. Because dirt weighs roughly 3,000 pounds per cubic yard, that's a pretty bad collapse. As we approach the trench and quit looking or quit immediately looking for horizontal cracks, we want to look inside the trench and we want to look for vertical cracks within the sides of the trench. This is important. It gives us a clue if there's already been a partial collapse of one of the walls, and it can also indicate that a collapse is imminent. So that's something that the competent person needs to look for. So we look inside, we look for vertical cracks. If there happens to be a vertical crack, that dirt can slough off and slide into the trench. It can be a partial collapse or it can be a full collapse. A lot of times when these vertical cracks forms, vibration from the heavy equipment can make the crack widen, and therefore the collapse happens a little bit quicker. So there again, vibration, heavy equipment, weight from adjacent buildings all contribute to this type of collapse. A lot of times what happens is we have a partial collapse along one of the side walls, whether it's the long side or the short side, and you get a bell-shaped kind of divot in the wall. And what happens is people walk up to the side, they don't realize there's no dirt supporting them underneath it, and because of that they slide right into the trench. So these are things we need to look for, obviously. Horizontal depressions and cracks as we approach the trench, and vertical cracks that both weight and vibrations from heavy equipment, buildings, etc., can cause problems. We also do not want to ignore the big picture. We do not want to ignore other things like overhead power lines and the other dangers from heavy equipment. So we want to be vigilant. We want to make sure we pay attention to all those things that can cause problems. We want to make sure that we protect people with sloping, benching, trench boxes. We want to apply those solutions correctly. We want to realize that, yes, we can identify some indications that a trench collapse or a partial collapse is imminent, but we do not want to lose sight that they can happen at any time without any warning. So we want to make sure we pay attention to that, and we also want to make sure we do not lose sight of the big picture, because the big picture is that construction sites and construction type sites are very dangerous. There's heavy equipment. We have to worry about swing radius of buckets from backhoes and track hoes. We have to worry about power lines. We have to worry about being impaled on things that we can fall on, as well as fall protection. So in summary, as we go on these sites, we need to have a plan. We need to implement that plan, how we approach a trench, what we look for, both as far as trench-related hazards as well as other hazards. Say, even typically if you're on the side of a road, you have to worry about people driving and traffic. We have to have an understanding and know what the weather has been like. We have to look at the trench. We have to also look at the big picture. These are typically things the competent person is responsible for, but it is also the responsibility of everyone, in my opinion anyway, to take care of and take responsibility for ourselves and take responsibility and take care of our coworkers. It's going to require that we be adults and speak up if we see something that is an issue, and also be an adult and receive that communication in the right way. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, please contact your JTNS instructor. They will do everything they can to answer your questions. If they do not know the answers, they'll look them up. Thank you. Have a great day and stay safe.